Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I'm here with a group of seekers, and we are studying the Gita. We are reading through the Gita, talking about its relevance to our lives, and it's a lot of fun. We do this on Monday and Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. If you ever want to join us, the links, you can visit our Instagram at Seekers Quest 108, and the links are in the bio to get on the WhatsApp group and get the Zoom links and everything to join us. So please join us live, and so that we can hear from you of how these scriptures are relevant in your life. And today we are making our way through chapter 3. So chapter 3 is called Karma Yoga, Yoga of Detached Action. And we are on text 13 today. We've been talking about sacrifice. We spent the last class talking a lot about sacrifice, and we're going to kind of continue and deepen that conversation today. So we'll start with text 13. Pull it up in Veda base. 13 says, "The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others, who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment, verily eat only sin." So eating, there's different forms of sacrifice. We talked about this. In this section specifically, we're talking a lot about relationship with the demigods and offering to them. But here we're talking about offering food to the Lord as a sacrifice, which is another form of sacrifice. And this process nourishes the body spiritually. It makes what is material spiritual. So that sacrifice is kind of like the bridge of what makes material spiritual. And the idea is, again, cultivating that mood of sacrifice, that nothing belongs to us. We didn't really acquire anything. We may have gone to the grocery store and bought some groceries, but without the sanction of God behind that, right? Growing that food, or mostly growing that food, we wouldn't have it, even if it's something that was processed or we turned into something. If we didn't have that raw material that's provided by God, in addition to the sunlight and the water, everything needed for it to grow, we wouldn't have it. So it's cultivating that mood where we acknowledge that, and we engage in that reciprocal relationship with divinity, so that anytime we're ingesting, we're putting anything inside our bodies, we're trying to generate that consciousness that this isn't mine, that we recognize where this source came from, and we are expressing gratitude in that way for it. So it's saying here, this nourishes the body spiritually, and by such action, just by doing this, our pastful sinful reactions are vanquished, right? So it cleanses us. It's like purifying. And the body becomes immunized to all contamination of material nature. So again, we're making what's material spiritual. And in that, we're making spiritual progress. Just like when there's an epidemic, a vaccine, like when there's COVID, we have a vaccine that protects people from the attack of such epidemic. This is the same way. Food offered to Krishna and then taken by us makes us resistant to material affection, because again, we start cultivating that consciousness. We make what is material spiritual. So if we only eat food that's been offered to the Lord, all of our past material infections are counteracted. But if we don't, we continue to increase the volume of sinful action. So this is such a simple thing that we all can do. And to be honest, I was just talking to Todd about this, because he just went to New Vrindavan. I don't think he's on the call right now, but he just went to New Vrindavan and he got some things to start offering his food. And he asked me if I do this. And I said, I try, but I forget sometimes, which is not really, I shouldn't forget, but I do. It's the reality. And but what we can all do at our house, it's very simple. We can set up a little altar. Todd got this, a bell and a little plate, and we can offer anything that we eat. We can say a little prayer. We can, express that sentiment of gratitude, and then we can honor the prasadam. That's what we call it. We call it prasadam after it's been offered. We call it prasadam, which means like spiritually sanctified food. And then we can honor it. We call it honor it. And in that way, we spiritualize it. But if you don't have an altar, if you don't have a bell, if you can't offer, even just like cultivating that consciousness before you eat whatever's in front of you, is is good. So it's good just to kind of get into that mentality. And it helps. It helps, again, throughout our day, thinking of God throughout our day, whatever we're doing, we're cultivating that consciousness. So this verse here, it's talking about it's food as a sacrifice, but it's really also an expansion from an earlier verse 3.9, which talked about how sacrifice leads to freedom from bondage, right? So Krishna in this verse is explaining what the rationale for that is. And what it's alluding here to is a deeper worldview, right? A worldview that's involving the idea that human existence is not just about me and my path ahead and my choices, right? It's not just isolated in my bubble to the me bubble, right? We have a path ahead, but we're part of a much bigger universe, right? And if we understand that we're part of this universe, above us are higher beings, right? We talked about this concept of demigods, like managerial posts that serve God. And we serve those demigods by sacrifices, and they reciprocate with us by providing life's necessities, right? And that's what's being explained here. It's continuing that theme. So two kinds of people are talked about here in this verse, those who sacrifice and those who don't. And it's saying those who sacrifice are free from sins. Those who don't, their lives become full of sin. Just like that example we talked about in the government, if someone is paying taxes, they'll be held accountable. Or someone is not paying taxes, they'll be held accountable, right? They have to pay for actions. So if they're taking advantage of the things that are provided by the government, our roads or all the things that the government provides, but they're not contributing back, there'll be repercussions for that. So this same mood we see all around us. We talked about this before too, right? We see in our relationship with ourselves, we see in our relationship with our family, right? We try to teach our kids to be grateful, to have that kind of reciprocal relationship. If where somebody does something for them, they say thank you. We try to do the same thing in the expanded worldview in our relationship with God, because if we don't, we end up kind of forgetting God, right? And that's what even offering this food before we eat it or honor it does for us, right? It helps us to constantly remember God, because it's so easy to just start get into the mentality that I prepared this food, I bought this food, right? This is me or whoever, my husband or whoever it is that provided it, that this is them. So we really want to cultivate that mindset throughout our days, that it's not, right? It's not us. It's something higher than us, that we can't even we could never even compete with that. Like there would be no way we could provide what God provides for us. It would be comical to try. I mean, so even just acknowledging that is important. And that's why this practice can be really powerful, simple, but powerful. And that if, you think of how many times you eat a day, just that many times a day, you're thinking of God, you're reaching out for that reciprocal relationship with God. But even higher than that is just the principle of sacrifice. And that's just an example of one of the sacrifices that we can do and that is important. So when we perform sacrifice, we talked about the concept of trading the present moment for the future, right? Like an athlete who has to be pretty disciplined in their workout regimen, so that they can be prepared for that big game. In the same way, we sacrifice some pleasure, some nice and treat in the present, so that we can prosper more in the future. So that's just at the psychological level how this works. But when we talk about sacrifice at a worldview, again, this concept that we're taking things from the universe. Each of us need this light, heat, air, water, food. We cannot produce these things. On some level, we think we can, but we really kind of forget who's behind it all, right? We're so dependent on these needs, on our arrangements far beyond ourselves. So though our work is necessary, somebody needs to maybe plant the grain, somebody needs to sow the grain, somebody needs to bring them to the market. Our work is necessary. It's secondary to the ultimate provider, to the ultimate source, which is God, who provides these things. just like birds, that run around chirping in the mornings, they're looking for grains. But but they're just looking for the grains. If God didn't provide the grains, there would be nothing for them, right? So nature is arranging this for them. And if it doesn't, then they'll die, frankly, and we would too. So we're dependent on these factors far beyond our control. And these factors can affect us in ways that we can't even conceive. So acknowledging this is what we do through sacrifice, right? And acknowledging this, we gain humility, a sense of humility and a sense of responsibility, right? A sense of humility that I'm dependent on something far beyond myself. We like to get into these little God-centered mentalities where we think that we did it all, right? That we're the doers, that we provided this, that we cooked this, that we bought this. But the reality is we're just a smaller part of that, a secondary part of that is really would be nothing without the primary source, which is God, right? So if we can cultivate this mindset, it'll make us humble and it'll also make us responsible, right? Like I need to do something in reciprocation with those factors beyond myself. And if I'm not doing that, I'm ungrateful and I'll be incriminated. And we can experience this in our day-to-day relationships, right? Our relationship is not, how successful is your relationship with your spouse if there's no reciprocation, right? If they're just giving to you, providing for you, doing for you, and there's no reciprocation, right? They don't feel appreciated. You're just kind of taking, maybe not even acknowledging what they're doing, right? Like how sustainable is that? How long is that really going to last for us if that's our relationship dynamic? What to speak of, all that God does for us, all that God provides for us, and how often we walk about our days not even thinking about it. When you think about it like that, it's like, how could I eat lunch without even thinking about where it came from? Like you go to your friend's house for dinner and they cook this beautiful dinner for you. They spend all day preparing it. You say thank you, right? You express your gratitude and you probably feel a little bit warm inside, like, oh, and you feel so connected, right? But imagine what God does for us, right? Without even, and he doesn't ask for anything in return, and he gives us his love unconditionally. But at the same time, if we want that next level relationship with God, if we want that reciprocal connection, if we really want to lean into God, we need to acknowledge this. We need to have this gratitude. This is the worldview of how this works, how we can make spiritual progress, how we can be more connected to God, and ultimately more fulfilled in our lives. Nitai says, I heard in a class how everything will be taken from us, and we might as well proactively give it away, sacrifice for a higher purpose, for a higher benefit. Yeah, that's beautiful. We can't take anything with you. So why not use what we have to contribute to the whole, understanding that we're just a small piece of that. And we need the whole to function, right? So when we get this bigger worldview, we understand that if we take from nature, we have to give back to nature. And we want to give back to nature in the same way. When you go to your friend's house and they make you a nice dinner, you want to give back to them, right? Or if somebody does something really nice for you, that's just like way above and beyond. I know when that happens to me, I'm like kind of trying to think, okay, what could I do for them that would make them feel the way that I feel? Right. So we should have the same kind of relationship with God. Right. And the thing is, God teaches us, okay, this is what you can do. This is what is recommended, so it's not even like a question mark. We don't even have to get creative. God tells us this is what you can do for me. The sacrifice of this age we talked about is chanting the holy names. So that's the biggest sacrifice that we could do. So if we're not just isolated beings living on our own without any care for the universe, and we see this idea coming out like in environmental consciousness more and more, right? When there's environmental consciousness, we understand that we can't just be taking from nature, right? We understand that the universe works according to different balances. And this understanding is leading us to try to live in harmony with nature. And that's becoming more and more, we see that more and more around us. Right? This vision that there's a bigger universe, which is providing me needs, and I need to reciprocate with that. There was a study in Nature magazine that if all the sunlight that fell on Oklahoma in 1 month were billed, if like we had to pay for that, all the sunlight that fell on Oklahoma in 1 month, it would be more than a century of the budget of America. Right? Like so much is the amount of energy coming in so profusely. We wouldn't even be able to afford it. Like it's, again, compared to what we're capable of on our own, it's like comical. Like when we look at what we can do, it's like children compared to what God does for us. But yet we hardly even acknowledge it. Right. And it's kind of like a baby, right? I have this baby and I just give and give and give to this baby. And this baby doesn't have evolved consciousness enough to really recognize that and reciprocate. I mean, I would say she does, because she like smiles at me and, does her little faces, which just like totally warm my heart. But the same kind of concept that like I'm just giving to this baby, and this baby doesn't have the consciousness to reciprocate yet. And that's kind of like our relationship with God, right? God is just giving, giving, giving. And unless we're cultivating this consciousness, right, we can easily just not even acknowledge or know, like my baby. And so in that, we need to grow up. We need to grow up, and we need to take responsibility for a role in the universe. And Anita just said hi. Hi, Anita. Okay. So when we talk about rituals or practices, a lot of what we talk about in the Vedas is fire sacrifice. And in Vedic tradition, this is one of the most like visually dramatic practices. And people light fire, put things in the fire, offer things to the fire, and then mantras are chanted. And this is just kind of like what's referenced a lot. And it's not we shouldn't get like so caught up in the sacrifice that's being talked about. Some of these sacrifices were like 3,000, what was it, like 3,000 BC when the Gita was spoken. Now it's like 2000, the year 2023. So there's quite a difference there in like the kinds of sacrifices that people did. So we don't need to get so caught up in it, in the same way that like if somebody from back then came here and saw like our digital currency, or they would like not really be able to fathom it. So we may not always be able to connect with some of these sacrifices, but the principle is the same. And the principle that this reciprocation, this worldview, that this reciprocation is necessary for the proper functioning and harmony of things with divinity, stands. And that's really what's being pushed here. And in that, there's so many intricate balances in nature that wouldn't be possible without higher principle, right? And that principle is the supreme being with a cabinet of ministers that we've talked about called demigods, and we need to be in harmony with the cosmic administration. And how we are in harmony with the cosmic administration will be discussed in the next verse. So does anybody want to share anything, anybody want to elaborate or share a reflection before we move to the next verse? Chris, please share. You're on mute, just so you know.
Okay, I'm off mute.
Great.
I love that verse a lot. I just want to say that offering food has really changed my life. I'm a high stress, like high anxiety person, and knowing when I'm cooking that I'm going to be offering the food, like I'm not making it for me, we're doing this for God, really helps me slow down a little bit and be more present in what I'm doing, which is really helpful. And the idea of making this food, presenting it in a nice way, saying a mantra or something like that, letting it sit for a little bit, just giving myself some time to like understand that this isn't about me, is really helpful. And I'm just glad that we touched on that today. And I don't know Todd, but that's awesome that you're doing that. I just started doing that not too long ago too. And I bought Krishna's own plates to use just for my offering. So it's really exciting. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Wow, thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's another thing we could do if we want to take it a step further, is get God his own plates so that they're clean, right? And we even have kind of different standards for that. We keep them clean. We don't like put anything that would our mouth near them, or we don't eat off his plates or anything like that. And I love what you said too, that space between offering and waiting to eat it. Has anyone else experienced how hard sometimes that space is? It's like, I'm like looking at my watch, like, okay, it's been a minute and 2 minutes. But I love what you said in that, and I haven't tried to do this. I think maybe I will next time, because I love that you said that, to really try to cultivate that consciousness that this isn't about me. Right? This isn't about me. And I prepared this as an offering. This was a sacrifice, really, of my time, and now I get to honor it after I offer it, like the remnants that from God I get to honor. And in that, it's spiritual. So it's really more about that connection and establishing that reciprocal relationship than like just the me mindset of this is mine, this is going to bring me enjoyment and pleasure, and kind of trying to shift away from that. And I love what you shared, really speaks to that. Thank you. Nild, please share with us.
Yeah, that idea of connection and being with others. We regularly host parties that involve lots of food, and maybe for 25, we've had 50 people over, and there's a lot of food preparation. And one of the things that I think about is I try to think about the path of where the food, the, the farmer who planted the food, those who picked the food, those who trucked the food, those who sold the food, those who put it up on the racks in the store. And also, as I'm working away, I made eggplant parmesan uh, a week or so ago, and I thought about those who were going to be eating it, and thought about how I care about each of those individuals, and it really it makes it fly. Uh, Rather than it being tedious, it speeds the process along. And I'm not thinking so much about how much work it is, but how much I try to be cooking with love. And, that seems to really make it. The food ends up tasting really good.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it's a perfect example of how just cultivating certain consciousness behind what you're doing can change the entire experience, right? And something as simple as preparing food, like you both talked about, if we can slow down, if we can prepare it in that kind of consciousness, right? If we're preparing it, like we're preparing it for God. And in that, we put that extra care, that extra love. And it may seem a little bit even silly to you, like, okay, well, God, it's not like God can actually come and eat it, or but we cultivate this consciousness around it. And in that way, we can connect to something spiritual, because we're on this material plane. And in this material plane, otherwise we can't. But through doing sacrifices like that, we can spiritualize. We can spiritualize the food. And in that, have that connection with God, that connection with other people that we're sharing the food with, and then they can experience that connection with God. So it's definitely something to try, or something to be even more mindful about. Maybe even like, okay, this one meal a week that I cook, I'm going to try to, put on some kirtan, get in this consciousness, cook it as if I'm cooking it for God, offer it, and just see how that feels. Right? See how that feels. Offer it, share it. And again, I think, as you guys have all talked about today, we if we can create the space in our lives, in our minds, to do that, it's undeniable that you will feel some kind of reciprocation, some kind of benefit. So thank you guys for sharing your experiences.
No, can you hear me?
Oh, Lisa, can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah.
Lisa?
All right, can you hear me?
You sound like a little bit distant.
I'm not sure what's going on with my phone. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, we can hear you a little bit. Let's see.
Okay. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
perfect. Yay. Yes.
So, what I wanted to say, thank you for this conversation, is that what I was taught is that sacrifice means to make sacred.
Mm,
And so, this idea of making sacred our offering to God and recognizing first and foremost that we're one with that idea so that all of our attention and focus on the things that we bless with our awareness then becomes sacred and holy in our the activities of our life. And as you were speaking, I was reminded of this billboard that I drove past. And it said, "What if tomorrow you only had the things that you were thankful for today?" And
mm,
to bring in this whole idea that I'm consciously in a relationship with my higher aspect and I'm making sacrifices or making sacred all day. First and foremost, my thoughts, so that my thoughts become a sacrifice, that I'm making those sacred, and then everything follows from that idea. So I really love
mm.
this, and thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, consciousness is the ultimate sacrifice, right? Where we put our mind. It's like even if we show up, like even if we show up for a date, but we're on our phone the whole time, like the other person is going to feel that lack of attention, right? Or that inattention. And if it's a first date, there might not be another date, right? So in that same way, when we're engaging in these sacrifices, whether we're preparing food, whether we're chanting, really being mindful of where our consciousness is, where our attention is. And the more that we can tie that consciousness, our attention to the object, our beloved, the deeper that we're going to experience that relationship, no doubt. And again, we see this in our day-to-day relationships around here, right? Like if we're just going through the motions, that's we're going to feel that in that relationship, the amount of connection and closeness that we feel is going to correlate accordingly, to how much we actually put our attention into it. Thanks for that reminder. Okay, I will say, I have deities at home, and I haven't, because I'm always holding my baby. I can do a lot when I'm holding my baby because she's like sleeping a lot. But if I put her down, she wakes up. So I have to hold her a lot. So I do a lot, I read a lot, I could do a lot, but I can't worship my deities here. And I was telling Veda this, and he said, "Oh, you should worship them in your mind." And it's something I've never been like, it's hard for me to do that. I'll be honest. Like I think of them a lot, I offer them things a lot, but to do a elaborate worship in my mind, I'm not so great at it. It's difficult. And that's why we have these like physical, I can physically offer my deities a lamp. I can physically offer my deities incense. I can sing to them. And again, it might seem kind of strange to you, or even kind of funny if it's not a practice that it's definitely not a practice that we're used to in our culture. But I can tell you, it helps. It's kind of just like a vehicle for that consciousness. It kind of like contains it and helps express it in a way that makes you feel very connected. Because without these practices, without these physical practices, it's difficult just to do it in your mind. So both I think are important, and I'm experiencing that now as I'm trying to do things more in my mind. It's we're blessed to have these practices that we can physically engage in, and that's what bhakti is. We can put our senses into this connection with God. And again, might seem a little funny to you, but because that's the way we relate in this material plane, it helps us to generate that connection, to make what's spiritual, to make what's material spiritual. It really does. Even just like chanting out loud as opposed to chanting in your head. Like I used to be a meditator, and chanting, when I started chanting out loud, I'm like, this is really weird. But the chanting out loud, it helps. It helps to engage our senses, because we're beings that have senses, and that is how we engage in the world around us. So now we can engage for God, and in that it can become spiritualized. And if you can get really sincere about it, you'll feel the benefit, no doubt. So thank you all for sharing. Mariah, please share.
Hare Krishna. Yeah,
Hare Krishna.
this conversation reminded me of this little book that I got for kids. It's called Sweet Rice for Lord Vishnu. And it's about this Brahmin who meditates. And he's only meditating on making sweet rice for Vishnu. He's not actually physically doing it. But he's like so focused in his meditation that he's like visualizing himself doing every step of making the sweet rice. And then at the end of it, he's like imagining, and he puts, I have the book in front of me, and he puts his finger out to touch it. And he's like, oh, I should test to see if it's hot or not. And then he goes, ouch. In real life, he like gets a burn on his finger. And it says, I don't understand, muttered the Brahmin. It's only a small burn and hardly hurts. But how could I get a real burn when I was only imagining that I cooked the sweet rice for Lord Vishnu? And then it goes on to explain, when the bewildered Brahmin arrived, Lord Vishnu said, or a plane came and got the Brahmin and brought him to the Vaikuntha planets. And so the Lord Vishnu said, welcome to your eternal home in Vaikuntha. Here's where you will live forever. Now the Brahmin understood that the Lord is all pervading. Even though Vishnu lived in Vaikuntha, he also was present in the Brahmin's heart when he meditated during worship. The moral of the story is that even gifts offered in meditation and prayer are accepted by Vishnu or God. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that's what sparked in me during this whole conversation, especially when you were saying like worship the deities in your mind. And it is hard to focus the mind that intently, but it does show that it's still accepted by the Lord, you know? So yeah, it's powerful. The mind is powerful, you know?
It is. And that worship, that's non-different. It's just like what you said, if you're doing it in your mind, it's non-different. The problem is it's more difficult. It's really difficult to keep that level of consciousness. I mean, it's so much easier when I sit at my altar and I can physically do it. It's easier. So we're fortunate to have these practices, but that point remains. The consciousness is what's important. Thank you. It's a sweet story.
Thank you.
Okay, so 3:14. Let's move on here if I can get my screen to share. Okay, 3:14. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, that's the word for sacrifice, and yajna is performed of prescribed duties. So this is again elaborating further on the point that we can't survive without food. We don't produce the food on our own. Food requires nature, and one key element of that is rains. If it wasn't for the rains, the food wouldn't grow and it wouldn't be here. So humans need grains. Grains require rains. That was kind of fun. Humans need grains. Grains require rains. Rains come from sacrifice, and sacrifice comes from work. So God is the personal beneficiary of all sacrifice, right? And the master, and he's also the master of all the demigods who serve him. And the Gita says the demigods serve God as different limbs of the body serve the whole. So they're just working on behalf of God. They're appointed officers who manage the material affairs. And the Vedas, the scriptures, direct sacrifices, like give us sacrifices to satisfy these demigods so that they'll be pleased and they'll give us rains. This is kind of the philosophy behind this. And but the reason that we talked about before, that we don't directly, as devotees, we don't really worship the demigods so much, is because when the Lord is worshipped, when God is worshipped, the demigods, who are all different limbs of the body, are automatically worshipped. So therefore, there's no need to worship the demigods separately. but the concept remains the same. And we talked about the direction being in the Vedas because to meet different people where they're at. And at the beginning, if you're only interested in your sense gratification, if you're only interested in, rains so that you can eat food and have pleasure, then your relationship, you may just worship a demigod that provides rains, and so that you can get that. And in that way, you're maybe not interested in a full relationship with God, a loving relationship with God. So you're not there yet. And you just care about your own sense gratification. And in that way, you can work towards being there one step at a time, and you can still have some kind of reciprocal relationship with the universe. So we talked about this in the last class, kind of how that works with the demigods. But what we're trying to cultivate here, and what Prabhupada is teaching us, is that we can just worship God, and through that, the demigods are worshipped, and we're more engaged in a loving relationship with God in that way, which is what we aspire for. So when we work with the understanding that we're working in a mood of sacrifice, playing our part in the organization of the cosmos, that work becomes a sacrifice. So again, here, when we talk about the grains and the rains and the demigods, it can seem kind of esoteric, right? And again, this process, it's not just mechanical, but it's also personal and reciprocal. And that's really the main point here, again, is the essence, the consciousness behind what we're doing. Because again, the Gita was spoken, 5,000 years ago, and things were different then. But what we can really focus on is the principle that if I give something, that if I get something, that I need to give something back. Right? The mechanism is not as important as the principle that we give and we get. Right? How we give and how we get is context dependent. But what we should really pick up here is this principle, right? This principle, because we're not trying to approach God for our sense gratification. That's not the kind of relationship we're aspiring for with God, right? We want a loving relationship with source, right? With divinity. So in that, we need to understand this principle of sacrifice. And God gives us the sacrifice for this age, which again is chanting of the holy names. That if you want a loving reciprocal relationship with God, chant God's holy names. That's the prescription for this age. And Krishna is telling Arjuna here that if he works with the mood of sacrifice, he is working within the harmonious functioning within the universe. And that's what he's meant to do, right? That's the significance of this verse. From your work, sacrifice will come. So as we're kind of, reading about these processes with the demigods and the rains and the cycle of sacrifice, what we really want to extract here is the principle, is the essence of sacrifice. And then in that way, we can apply it to the current age that we're in and our specific prescription of sacrifice, which is chanting of the holy names. So with that, we can move on to 15, unless anybody wants to share anything. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So this section of the Gita is going deep into philosophical worldviews, right? There are roles that we have that are directed by the sacred texts, which is the Vedas, right? And there's roles that are directed by them, which are spiritual. Just as we have to abide by laws of nation that we live in, we should want to live by laws of spiritual guidebooks, right? That's really why we're even here, right? Is to understand what's communicated to us in these spiritual guidebooks so that we can apply them to our lives, right? And these guidebooks are called the Vedas, and they are working directions. And they're made so that we, as conditioned souls, who are eager for material enjoyment. That's why we're all here. We're all eager for material enjoyment. We still are thinking that we can extract some kind of pleasure from this world. The Vedas will teach us how to return back to Godhead, right? And they're made so that we can satisfy our desires and return to Godhead, having finished that enjoyment. So that's why there's even a progression, depending on where you are, depending on how attached you are to material pleasures around you, and what your ultimate goal is, right? What your ultimate goal is. Some people, their ultimate goal is not a loving relationship with Source, and they're just trying to eat for pleasure. But wherever you are, there's some kind of prescription in the Vedas for you that will get you on the right track to start engaging in some kind of reciprocal relationship with higher authorities. And in that, the opportunity to progress. Right. And that's the purpose of the Vedas. That's why we're here. And it's so beautiful that they'll meet anybody where they're at, right? Depending on your attachment and your desire, they'll meet you where you're at. And in that, it's a chance for all of us to attain liberation. So in the last verse that we just talked about, it said that all living beings subsist on grains, which come from rains, which come from sacrifice. And sacrifice comes from our duties. Everything in this world is temporary, right? It's prone to fall into illusion. It's all temporary. The spiritual reality is manifest through this chain in sacrifice. Again, we talked about earlier today, sacrifice makes that which is spiritual accessible to the material, right? So we have the material plane that we all live on, the spiritual plane. Sacrifice makes the spiritual attainable. Again, it's like the bridge, right? There's a higher spiritual level and the material level. And if we want to reach that spiritual level, the only way we can do it from this material level is to engage in sacrifice, right? And the chain of thought was that earlier in 3.9, a few verses ago, Krishna says that work done as a sacrifice leads to freedom from bondage. Do you remember that? If your work is done in a mood of sacrifice, you'll be immune from the karmic reactions from it, right? We won't be bound. How that is happening is what's being mentioned here, right? If we constantly remember that we're part of a bigger reality, and we have a part of that bigger reality, then we won't be bound, right? So it's talking about cultivating that mood. And that mood is meant to reflect awareness of a cosmic reality. It's not something that we just like imagine. It's not like a figure of the imagination. No, it's reflective of a higher reality that, as we already talked about, is undeniable. There is something bigger than us. You know, however big you want to imagine your reality, it's not just us. This isn't just the me world, right? There is a higher reality outside of you. And if you want to imagine, if you want to, know it at the biggest level, the higher reality is that we're individuals. We're a part of Krishna. We're a part of God. And if work is for selfish reasons, it leads to bondage, right? If it's selfless, it doesn't lead to bondage. It leads to liberation. And that's the mood that we're trying to cultivate here. That's the worldview that we're trying to cultivate. And in that, we can access the spiritual realm. So the Vedas, what we read about, they'll talk about sacrifice as a ritual. A lot is like fire sacrifice. We'll hear a lot about that. There's a fire sacrifice. They offer things to the fire. This is a practical expression of the principle, right? But this can be various domains, something like offering your food, like we talked about, and then something like offering our consciousness, like we also talked about. That's remembrance of God. Right? This is evoked through chanting of the holy names. This is huge. Like we talked about, it's our most fundamental resource is our consciousness. Okay, because our consciousness tells us how to function, how to earn money, how to use resources, how to eat food, how to understand the wisdom of the Gita. Right? So if we're offering that consciousness, then it's gonna influence everything that we do throughout our days, and therefore our lives, right? On a large scale. The more that we can sacrifice, we can give that consciousness to God. We can think about God and offer gratitude to God before we eat. You know, how many times do we eat a day? 4 or 5, 3 times, however many times you eat a day. If we can think about God, if we can start to have that consciousness before, we can start to shift our consciousness so that we see changes throughout our days. We see changes throughout our lives. And gradually we become more connected, more selfless, less fearful, right? More loving. And that's how this process works. So consciousness is huge sacrifice. But the point of sacrifice is that we give up something that can be used for our enjoyment for a higher purpose. And that's, again, how we ultimately circle back and find the real lasting, enduring enjoyment in life or fulfillment in life. Something deeper than that fleeting pleasure. So does anybody want to share anything about that? This is a deep class, Denny says. Thanks, Denny. Yeah. It's a good topic. It's a good reminder for me because I'll be honest, I have not been as good about offering my food as I should be. Like before I had a baby, it was like so easy. I had all the time in the world. But now it's like I feel like I have, this amount of time to prepare and then it's like, but even if you don't have time, even if you're crunched for time, you can still take your food to wherever you're going to eat it. Say an intentional prayer, offer it to something in your mind. Say you don't have an altar or you can't be near your altar. Offer it to God, to your deity in your mind, or God in your mind, in your heart. And then give it a couple minutes, that space. Like Chris said, give that space to really allow that intention to set, that this isn't for me, right? This is for God. And yeah, that's beautiful. So there's no excuses. I'm realizing there's no excuse for me. I'm like, oh, I can't do this elaborate thing. Okay, I'm just not going to do it. No, we could do something. You could do something, no matter where you are, what your circumstances. I'm more so talking to myself right now. So thank you all. Oh, Mariah, please share.
Yeah. My friend sent me this video the other day, and it's like Deepak Chopra talking to Oprah back in I don't know, the 70s or 80s, because you could tell by the recording it's so old. And he was basically, he was talking about consciousness, and he shared a study that they did back then where they were looking at specifically cholesterol, I think. And so there was 2 different rats, and the first rats, they just threw the food down and they gave them the food to eat. The second rat, someone came in and caressed the rat and made them really calm, gave them the same exact food. And these were high cholesterol foods. Gave them the same exact foodstuffs, and the rats ate. But the rats that were made calm and in a loving exchange, basically before, their cholesterol, they absorbed the nutrients. Their cholesterol didn't go off the charts, whereas the other rats gained all these diseases and cholesterol. So that's something I've really been thinking about too, not to bring offering our foodstuffs to a mundane level, but just the health benefits physically to our body. When we slow down, we offer it. So there's that whole being exchange with the Lord. And then we give it that second to really put our mind and our heart in a place of receiving, this is the Lord's mercy. We're going to assimilate it so much better. It's going to taste better. It's going to not to that sounds like it's making it sense gratificatory for my body, but that's another aspect. And maybe that's just where I'm at and what I need at this time. But it's that's helped me a lot too. Especially at work, because I don't really take a full lunch break. I take however long it takes me to eat. But I've been starting to incorporate offering before I eat, and then just sitting and feeling present in my body, because I stand all day and I'm on the go the whole time. And then I'm eating, and then I go back to moving, and I'm I feel bloated. My stomach hurts because I'm not resting before I eat. And even taking that 5 minutes, I offer, and then I sit and I'm set that intention of let me receive this as your mercy. Let this be nourishing to my body and my soul. I say something like that after I offer. And it's been just different. I can notice I slow down when I eat, and then I'm just more conscious of the whole process, and it is good for our health even too, so yeah.
No, that's a wonderful point. And it's such a beautiful thing about these spiritual truths is it's not just the truth at one level, right? It's the truth at various levels. And just like the Vedas, wherever you are, you can connect to it. And that's something also, this consciousness how we're treating ourselves, our relationship with God, it does show up in our bodies, in our minds, in our, relationships with people, with our children, with our spouses. I have an autoimmune disorder, and I've had it since I was like 15. And there's the Ayurvedic theory of autoimmune, because your body's like attacking itself, is that like psychologically you're attacking yourself. And so this is something I kind of dove deep into back like when I was really trying to heal it, because it was keeping me from getting pregnant for years. And was like, where am I attacking myself? And I genuinely feel like like leaving my job, like giving myself that space, like absorbing myself in spiritual truths, having a healthy relationship with my husband who's just like supportive and loving unconditionally, really has kind of like refined my rewired my relationship with myself, and that I feel like much more loving, peaceful. And I really think it healed my body in a way that I don't like. The autoimmune is gone, and I was able to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it works on all levels like that, to your point. Yeah. And we all care about that. I mean, we're not so detached. We can say we don't care about that. We do. Like it's important for our well-being, and that's where we are. So to acknowledge that these things have a big impact is powerful, and just another benefit of this spiritual practice that you'll see show up in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trevor,
That's
I saw it.
amazing. That's amazing
Yeah.
about your autoimmune. Like, but that's so true. Like, even if you look at more, I don't know, they're not as connected with God, but there's still like a spiritual practice of like healing and energy healing. If you heal on the energetic level, it heals on the physical level. And so, doing a spiritual practice is healing on, a whole nother level. Like,
Yeah.
So
even like pranayama, like the breathing practices, the effect that has on your body, on your nervous system. I mean, that's why we're like adopting all of these practices from the East that are really meant, to help us connect with God, but they bring profuse benefit to our lives and our bodies. And ultimately, as devotees, we can see that as, now we can serve God better. If we can prepare ourselves better, if our cup can be more full, if we can be more healthy and abundant, and our mindset, should be, okay, now how can I offer this? How can I give from this overflowing cup that I'm healthy and abundant and safe? And, I've kind of tweaked all these things in my body and my nervous system. And how can I show up and serve God better?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Trevor, did you want to share something? I saw your hand up, I feel like. I know. Oh, there you are.
Sure. Yeah, I was just gonna add to what already has been said by everyone. The offering the food and whatnot, it's a beautiful thing. My son even does it. He loves to help cook, and he loves to offer the food, and he says mantras and whatnot. He loves it. His favorite mantra is Govinda Jaya Jaya when we're doing kirtan now. He always tells me to do it, thanks to Maria.
Maria sings at our kirtan nights, and it's beautiful. And I can
Yeah.
hear Maria singing that song now too.
It's pretty cool though. Whenever I go to do events for people, he helps me make fresh pressed juice, and he offers it and whatnot, and then we build a shrine and do sound baths and stuff like that. But it's pretty cool. It's a powerful thing that and very recommended for devotees whenever when their wheels get turned into to preach from the Gita and the Bhagavad and distribute prasad. It's a very powerful, simple method to create happiness and harmony. And I was just gonna add, because if you're like, I know you're getting busy, your life will do that, and then your capacity will grow, and you'll get to an easier chapter. We're able to do more, but there's less happening, and you can have more control over your choices moment to moment. But if it happens to where you have to get a quick meal in, or things don't go as regulated as you would like it to, because Krishna is actually organizing those situations too, you know. The mind is good too. Yeah, Veda's absolutely right about that. If you're able to do it in your mind, but if it happens to where you forget 100%, because you're starving, you need nourishment or whatever, Prabhupada stated that if you're using your energy from the food for devotional service, that is as part of the offering of the prasad. So that's it's not absolutely you must do this or it's offensive. It's more like it helps you to gain control over your material senses and stay on that spiritual platform. So I'm not saying you don't have to do it, but I mean, when it comes down to it, if your energy is in devotional service, if you're using the energy you're getting from the food in devotional service, you don't really have to do it, but it's good to do it to set an example and to get in rhythm with it, you know, until your wheels are turning and your life is merged 100% in devotional service. It's good to stick to these regulated principles so that they get you there, you know what I mean? But even though whenever you do get on a higher level, you're still going to do the regulated principles because they're fun and they're effective and they're powerful, and it's just feels good to do.
Yeah, it's like the more that we do, the more that it becomes easier, and the more that we want to do, and the more it just becomes part of ourselves, really. It's like, oh, I wouldn't even eat without offering it first, because that feels so good. That's my connection. That's where we want to get. And if that's the beauty of what you're saying, if you do these things, the more you try to do in your life, the more that you'll kind of cultivate this, you'll build a new self, really, or you'll build on yourself in a way that you become more connected and conscious. That's really what we're trying to do here. Is we want to become conscious. We don't just want to mindlessly eat this food without any recognition of where it came from, or we want to have that harmony with the universe. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
You're welcome. There's another small thing that if anyone has been familiar with Dr. Emoto, I think that's how you say his name. He did an experiment on water to see how love energy and harmful or hateful energy, how it affects water on a cellular level. And he observed it under a microscope after even just writing the word love on it and writing the word hate or speaking into it and whatnot. He observed it and took pictures of what it looks like under a microscope. And yes, the love energy on many accounts, on all accounts, has an effect on your body on a cellular level to support the science of what Mariah was saying. I think they might have moved the videos onto Rumble though, because if you go on YouTube, you'll find fragments of it, but there's enough there at least. But I think it'll be more easy to find on Rumble. But yeah, Dr. Emoto did a pretty cool experiment on that.
Oh, I was going to say, if you're on our thread, you could send a link on our thread, but you're not on our thread yet, Trevor. You have to get on our thread.
I'm working on it.
But I know that, that's a beautiful example too. This consciousness is so powerful. Thanks, Trevor. And Nild, want to take us home here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as you were talking about feeding your daughter, I can think of no higher spiritual way to serve the divine than feeding your daughter. It just really made my heart sing, and I think that's the case for so many mothers, feeding their children, and as they grow, feeding them and preparing, and even characters like me who love to cook. So it's just and you're feeding us, not necessarily food, but with your words, and you're mothering us. So I so appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Nild. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's so sweet. Let's just speak of if I could get better at offering the food that then is used to feed her, that's would be like the ultimate. So that's going to be my goal this week, to do something in offering more of my food and yeah, relishing in that. Thank you all. Lisa
Thank you
says we
for
can, yeah, you said we can make a sacrifice, body, mind, and spirit to our Lord. As we do, all is purified, and our lives then bear witness to his presence as radiant health in all aspects of living. Ah, it's beautiful. Is that it's your own writing, I'm assuming? It's very nicely
Yes,
said.
that's mine.
It's very
Thank you
nice.
for everything that you give, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all. We'll see you on Thursday. Thank you for coming and sharing.
Blessings.
Krishna.